We're recording. And emitting.
Okay, welcome everybody to our first seminar of 2022. Thank you all for joining. Just while people may still be arriving to the meeting, I would just like to encourage anybody who is not yet a member of IACS or IAVCEI to join either one or both of these organisations, because it was free to join IACS and it's just a small cost to join IAVCEI, and there are some really great webinars and workshops that happen throughout the year that both of the associations put on, and there are also discounted conference fees and things like this associated with being a member of these organisations. So if you aren't already, please go ahead and sign up. But for today, I would like to welcome our two speakers, Christian Stenner and Linda Sobolewski. Christian is from the Alberta Speleological Society in Canada, and Linda is a PhD student at the Ruhr-Universität in Bochum in Germany. And they're going to talk about their work on the formation of ice caves. So really excited for this. Just before we start the seminar, I would just like to remind you that there will be time for questions at the end. And for this, you can either use the chat function or the raised hand icon, and then you can ask your questions. But please wait for the end for this. And during the seminar, please keep your microphone on mute so that there is no interruption for the speakers. And as always, we ask you to respect the speaker's work by asking for permission if you want to share or redistribute the material. So that's all from me. Please go ahead, Christian and Linda.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to present to you today. I guess, Linda, do you want to just introduce yourself, and then I'll take it from there if you want to say anything first?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Rosie already said that my name is Linda Sobolewski. I'm from Germany, from the Ruhr-Universität Bochum. And yeah, glaciovolcanic caves are very fascinating for me, and these are part of my PhD studies. And yeah, in this talk, we would like to introduce you to these glaciovolcanic cave systems, and we hope that you can share our enthusiasm for this and you will like them as well.
Thanks so much, Linda. So yeah, I'm from the Alberta Speleological Society, and I guess that means that my approach to this is more from the speleological perspective. And what that also means is that I'm not as well versed in volcanology or glaciology, so I certainly have a lot to learn on those aspects, which is why, hopefully collaborations like this will lead us down some different paths and some new learning. So again, thanks for everyone to be here, and let's continue on. We'll discuss, I'll sort of introduce the topic first, then we're going to discuss a few different examples of the field work that we've worked on, where me and Linda will go back and forth to describe some of that work, and then we'll finish off. So we'll skip back and forth a little bit throughout the talk. Okay, so moving on, because I'm talking from a speleological perspective, I really wanted to highlight that it is the UIS, the International Union of Speleology, the International Year of Caves and Karst, which was in 2021, but we've extended it into 2022 just to really highlight the importance of karst and caves, especially in relation to groundwater systems throughout the world. So not only is it important for those reasons, there's the archaeological reasons and the diversity of the cave environments that are important to recognize as well. So certainly have a look up at the International Year of Caves and Karst if you're interested to learn more about karstic caves, caves and karst rocks, but other types of caves, of which we are going to be discussing today. So really what we want to talk about first to introduce is, because you may not have seen the term in literature before, what are glaciovolcanic caves? So from the speleological perspective, we see ice caves as those caves in karst rocks that have perennial ice formations within. So that's been a definition that's been established and accepted. And so when we use the different terms, it's to sort of differentiate from those. Here's an example from the crater of Mount St. Helens, and we can see steam coming out of a cave entrance. And as a bonus, we can see Mount Rainier in the distance. This is looking through the breach of the crater, looking north. And so when it comes to glaciovolcanic caves, there's a few different ways to think about them, and that they could be a type of glacier cave. And that's been shown in literature as well as an example of pseudokarst. So those different types of karst that aren't necessarily formed by karst rocks. A glacier cave or an englacial conduit that is influenced by geothermal activity has been described as a subcomponent of glacier caves or pseudokarst. And that really kind of shows the sort of relationship to karst, and you could describe it almost as similar to the distinction between hypogenic and epigenic karst, where the formation of the cave system could be derived from influences of dissolution of the ice from above, like a glacier cave where the meltwater is flowing downwards, whereas the other example is groundwater rising into a karst zone can form caves as well. So that's how these could be different from englacial conduits and glacier caves, in that the formation of the cave is a formation mechanism that's caused from below, from the geothermal influence, rather than from the meltwater influence coming from above. We could also think of them as a phase change, and lava tubes are sort of that example as well, a change in state of matter. So the ice is melting, and that's the phase change. So the term as well is sort of can relate to the different mediums, snow, fern, or glacier ice. So they've been described as well as fern caves. I've seen them described as steam caves or other things like that, or glacier caves. But we've seen in examples that they can sort of go through all of those mediums. The one on the top right is one from Mount St. Helens, which is about a 12 meters depth, and you can see that the system is mostly formed in fern, whereas another example from Mount St. Helens, which the cave depth is about 70 meters, we see that in the deeper parts of the cave that this is a density of glacial ice. So the glaciovolcanic cave terminology sort of spans all of that, derived from the definition of glaciovolcanism, the interaction of heat from the Earth's interior with various types of ice masses. We can say that glaciovolcanic caves are the void spaces that are derived from that interaction. So as part of the recent paper in Bulletin of Volcanology, we did a bit of a review and sort of piggybacking on Edwards and others' work describing global glaciovolcanism and lining up the areas of glacier-ice interaction, we actually were able to sort of see where the potential for glacial volcanic caves could be. And in the literature, there actually are not very many examples that focused on the caves themselves. So what we found is that there are only a few places, Antarctica, the Pacific Northwest, and the Garibaldi volcanic belt in Canada, that had studies that specifically focused on these as void spaces. There are other examples. So the ones in red are the ones that we were confirmed that we know of the existence. The ones in yellow are the ones that had potential, that had sort of mentions, anecdotal notes in literature, or were ones that had been described perhaps 50 years ago, but without any recent visitation. We know these systems are dynamic. They could appear and disappear. So there wasn't necessarily confirmation of their existence today. Now, certainly this may spark some interest on the folks on the call here, that maybe you know of more examples, and we'd certainly be interested to hear of any others. So our group does a fair bit of field work, partnered with a group from the National Speleological Society of the United States called the Glacier Cave Explorers. And the number of researchers are involved in that. And our field work is really very interdisciplinary, drawing together a number of researchers from different disciplines. So the top row of photos is showing some of the examples specific to Mount Rainier, looking at the geochemistry of the Mount Rainier cave system, the climatology and the microclimates within, and then the physical geomorphology and mapping of the caves are some of the examples shown there. And then from Mount St. Helens, we can see some of the other examples. Again, example of the climatology. You can just see the orange smoke cloud, which is used to map the wind flow of the cave. And as well, just partnering with some of our research partners that focus on biology, microbiology, exobiology, or astrobiology, to find out what sort of organisms are living in the environments. And some of our partners at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, testing some of their technologies, precursor technologies for exploration of other icy voids that may exist in the solar system. And so the purpose of those studies, we're looking at seeing if monitoring of cave systems and void spaces under the ice could be a potential usefulness in terms of monitoring the volcano as a hazard prevention line of study, seeing if volumetric changes in the caves can be related to changes in the hydrothermal system. So in mapping subglacial areas of hydrothermal alteration, which we've done a little bit of at Mount Rainier, talked a little bit about the analogy to conditions on other ice bodies in the solar system. So that comes through in the robotics and in the microbiology studies. And then in the example of Mount Rainier specifically, this is a very popular mountain for climbers that will go to the summit, and they're in proximity to a very significant cave system that has hazards. So as far as the education and the hazard prevention for the public and for other researchers who may be involved, there's a sort of important piece there. And as well, that's within a national park in the United States. And so these being very sensitive environments, we certainly are concerned about the conservation of caves in general, and these especially, given that they're so unique. So with that in mind, we'll move from the introduction, and I'll pass it over to Linda to start talking about her work and our work in the crater of Mount St. Helens.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. So I would like to start with our first example for today, Mount St. Helens. In this image, you can see the crater of Mount St. Helens, which is over 1 mile wide, and you can also see the 2 lava domes which have built up in the center. You can see the old lava dome from 1980 to 1986, and the new lava dome, which has built up between 2004 and 2008. And yeah, what is really important for us, you can see the pretty young glacier, which is circumnavigating the two lava domes. And yeah, the glacier is really important for us because yeah, it contains these so-called glaciovolcanic cave systems. First investigations were already performed by Anderson and others in the 1990s. They mapped, I think it was about 3 kilometers of cave passages around the old lava dome, but yeah, these caves were mostly developed in firn ice, and due to renewed eruption starting in 2004, these caves were mostly destroyed. But since 2012, a new system of cave systems is evolving, which is located around the new lava dome. So how does it look in detail? We can see here a map which shows our survey results from 2014 to 2021. And you can see that we have mapped a very long system of cave passages, more than 3 kilometers. And you can see that most of the caves are located in the southern part of the new lava dome, but we can also see a slight migration towards the sides of the glacier and some isolated spots between yeah, the new and the old lava dome. Yeah, what is also obvious in this map, that we have a very dynamic morphology of cave systems. For example, if you have a look at Mothra Cave in this part here, you can see that the morphology is changing over the years. And another good example for this is Crevasse Cave on the side here. So yeah, during our expeditions, we always start to map these cave systems and try to understand the morphology changes. So what is it what makes Mount St. Helens unique for our studies and to study volcano ice interactions in general? Yeah, Mount St. Helens is has one of the last advancing glaciers worldwide and in the Cascade range. So yeah, this is just to emphasize that the glacier is extremely advancing. You can see here the development from 2006 to 2021. And you can see that the glacier tongue is advancing several hundred meters. What is even more important for us is what is happening around the new lava dome. We can see here the development from 2009 to 2021, and you can see that the rock-ice interface is migrating towards higher elevations of the dome. And you can see that the growth is really immense, and yeah, the glacier is starting to interact with fumarolic activities on the lava dome. What is also unique on Mount St. Helens is that during the lava dome growth between 2004 and 2008, it was the first time ever that lava dome emplacement through a glacier could be observed. Combining now the movement of the rock-ice interface and the location of glaciovolcanic caves, it becomes clear that cave systems are pretty young. You can see here images from 2009 to 2014, and you can see this blue dashed line showing the rock glacier interface, and the red areas are the cave systems, which we plotted on Google Earth imagery. So yeah, it becomes really obvious that in 2009, most of the cave systems couldn't have existed, as everywhere here is just the rock and the lava dome, and you do not have any glacial ice. So yeah, with Google Earth imagery, it's really easy to track the development of glaciovolcanic caves and to really understand when they have started to form. Yeah, speaking about Google Earth imagery, it also helps a lot to observe the glacier surface and to search for specific structures. Here we can see yeah, a kind of time series analysis, and I put 2 boxes on every image. The red box shows the entrance area of Rodin Cave and Hedera Cave, and the blue one the area of the Godzilla hole. And yeah, if we start in the beginning and going through 2021, we can really see that we have specific structures, and some of these structures are really permanent. For example, if we have a look in this image, we can see that the glacier has kind of crevasse-like features, And yeah, going back to 2021, we can see that this feature is becoming more and more distinct. Another example is this area here. This is a Godzilla hole, and we can really see the development over time. And yeah, these structures must be really large because they can be seen with Google Earth imagery. So for us, it's really helpful because we are able to identify kind of cave entrances and to yeah, to confirm our investigations from the field with these Google Earth imagery. Yeah, now I would like to show you a few examples of how these structures look like. So we have here the entrance area of Roden, Hedera, and Jidora Cave. And I think it's really good to have some people in this photo to really see how large these structures are. So we have kind of steep edge, several meters high, and also several meters long. So it's pretty obvious that these features can be seen on Google Earth. Another example is the entrance area of Mothra Cave. Here as well, you can see the two people standing in front of the cave entrance. And I think this is a really good possibility to get a feeling how large these entrances can be. Yeah, another example, and also my last example is, yeah, I think entrance area isn't the right word, but at least the location of one of the caves. This is Crevasse Cave, which is located on the eastern arm of the glacier. So you can really see that we have this structure which is caused by fumarolic activity. And yeah, most of these structures are really easy to identify on Google Earth. So talking now about glacier structures or surface structures, I think it's time to move on to the cave interior. So these are two examples of Mothra Cave, and I would like to show you these images to emphasize that the caves can be really, really large. And on Mount St. Helens, you usually have this kind of tephra layers because you have a lot of rockfall from the crater walls. And yeah, you can really identify different seasons of snowfall because you have this typical layering. And yeah, you can see that we can have some kind of ice tunnels in the caves, but we also have a contact with the lava dome, and we have kind of rocks here on the floor, and we really have this contact zone. I would also like to emphasize that the caves are pretty loud and wet, and it's very difficult to work inside these cave systems. And I think this gets obvious with this video. So moving on to a profile view. Yeah, when we started our studies, we were asking ourselves, how do these glaciovolcanic cave systems form? What are the main influencing factors? So if we have a look at the left side of this images here, we can see that we have the glacier, which is advancing and finally interacting with fumarolic activity. So yeah, during the development of a glaciovolcanic cave, we can kind of have this chimney formation. But as observed on Mount St. Helens, we usually have this kind of lateral development of caves rather than these chimneys. And yeah, over different seasons, we have kind of cave enlargement. This is usually happening during the winter season because cave entrances get closed by snow. And so the warm air heated by fumaroles can't escape. And yeah, we have cave enlargement. What can happen is that we can have partial cave collapse. I think Christian will show you an example later on. But yeah, typical for Mount St. Helens is that we really have this enlargement and lateral expansion of caves towards the lava dome. The other image on the right maybe emphasizes these factors a little bit more. So one main important factor is the exchange with the outside air and wind flows inside the caves. So during the summer season, we have the exchange with the external air, and warm air can escape from the caves. But as soon as the cave entrances get closed and we have snow sealing these entrances, we have kind of cave enlargement. And this is happening from year to year, and yeah, finally forming more than 3 kilometers of cave passages. So what else are we doing? We are also wondering about heat fluxes and geochemical and isotopic information about fumaroles. These examples show our work from 2021, and yeah, we try to find out if we have differences between fumarolic areas. So, for example, we have fumaroles on top of the lava dome, which show a really high flux, and these temperatures at these fumaroles are pretty high. They have pretty high temperatures, but we also have fumaroles with lower temperatures near the cave entrances. So we really try to distinguish between these fumaroles and try to find out if we have differences. And yeah, we also try to do some heat flux calculations using the accumulation chamber. So as we started this in 2021, we are not able to present final results yet. Just to give you an idea, the entrance area of Roden and Hedera Cave had soil temperatures of 26 to 92 degrees Celsius, and we had maximum CO2 emissions of 1,200 grams per square meter per day. So what else are we doing? We are also interested in LiDAR data and photogrammetry because we are able to calculate volumetric changes of the glacier. And yeah, in this example, we are mostly interested in Mothra Cave because we try to find out yeah, how much snow has accumulated, but also melted during the last 10 or 20 years. So right now we try to combine this with petrologic investigations. As I showed you before, we have characteristic tephra layers inside the caves. And we have found one layer which displays the eruption cycle from 2004-2008. So what we are doing right now is to correlate these findings inside the caves with the accumulation rates of the snow, and we try to reconstruct how much snow must have been melted in these years. So I would also mention that we have some microbiology studies going on. We can see here Rick Davis and Roberto Anitori, which have been to the field with us several times. And yeah, I think these glaciovolcanic caves have a lot of potential to make new findings. Moreover, they are important for extraterrestrial exploration, for example, to test ice robots as here performed by the NASA. This is something which has not really anything to do with these glaciovolcanic caves, but I would like to emphasize that climate changes and yeah, kind of heat periods, heat waves like we have experienced it last year on Mount St. Helens can also affect the glacier a lot. So this is, yeah, this was done with a time-lapse camera and is showing only a few days being in the crater of Mount St. Helens. And what is really, really extreme is that we have this retreat of glacial ice over just a few days. So maybe I can start it again and you can have a look at these rock parts here. So you can really see that the glacier is melting a lot only in these few days. Okay, so summing up now, on Mount St. Helens, we have a very young and evolving glaciovolcanic cave system, but also very dynamic. Right now, we can say that it's the second largest cave system we are aware of, and we have the growing glacier, and due to this, we also have growing cave systems. As observed so far, we have no hazardous atmospheres on Mount St. Helens. This means we do not really have hazards inside the caves and no problems with CO2 accumulations or any other toxic gases. So, and I think this is a really good point to turn over to Christian, who is telling us something about another volcano and yeah, showing you a lot of differences between cave systems.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Although I will say, not to say that there are not hazards in the cave systems, but in this case, just it wasn't an atmosphere hazard. We certainly have our work cut out for us in the field. With these is basically being very challenging environments at times. So we'll switch over though to Mount Rainier, because where we have Mount St. Helens is a very dynamic system. Mount Rainier actually is very interesting because the cave system there has been known about since the first ascent, the first recorded ascent of the summit. So just to orient you to the site, the summit of Mount Rainier has two overlapping craters. The east crater is on the left-hand side of the image, the west crater on the right-hand side, and as a bonus, we can see Mount St. Helens in the background. And so these have been known about and studied since the 1970s. Some mountaineers, Nelson and Whitaker, had made a sketch map of the caves, the first known. And then over a few years, some folks had done a number of studies to map out the cave system, study the subglacial areas, and it had published at that time, and that was the first full map of the west and east crater cave system. So from 1975 until now, we can actually see quite a lot of essentially static zones within the cave that have persisted for over 50 years, which is truly amazing. So the most recent field work was between 2014 and 2017, in which we remapped the entire system. Now, in the 1970s, the East Crater was 1,700 meters long, and the most recent statistics almost doubled the length of the cave system and found a total depth of 144 meters. Now, based on what we've known and seen of the other cave systems worldwide, this makes it the longest and deepest known glaciovolcanic cave in the world. So the question here is, if the old system was 1,700 meters and this one is 3,500, does that mean that there has been a significant increase in the sort of subglacial system and in terms of melting cave passages? Well, I would say that the majority of the cave passages have actually remained static, and only the entrance areas have really been changing. So from our survey data, we can recreate the structure in a 3D model, and we can spin it around because that's interesting to look at. But you can really see the subglacial topography and how the cave system is conforming to the outline of the East Crater. So an example around the entrance passages, from the crater rim, a series of passages descends down into what we call the master circumferential passage, which has remained static. So here's an example. There are fumarolic areas close to the entrance, which helped, I think, to maintain some of those entrances long term. But the master passage is essentially looks like this. We have quite a large open area it almost creates an entire circle around the interior. There's about 92 meters of intervening distance that it lacks towards the north end, where there's no connection. But this passage runs around almost the entire rim at a depth of about 60 meters below the surface at certain places. So we also located a subglacial lake within the East Crater cave system. So the elevation data would put it at 4,273 meters above sea level, and about 100 meters below the highest elevation entrance to the cave system. So the temperature ranges between 4 to 7 degrees in this area. And so part of the studies related specifically to the lake were published by Floria and others in 2021. And based on some of the data that we had, that was where we first really realized that there was an increase in cave air pressure and temperature over winter. and that this is correlated to seasonal weather, essentially sealing off cave entrances and causing that. Now, the increase in glacial melt over winter causes an increase in lake volume, and essentially establishes a bit of a dynamic equilibrium in the master passage of the cave system, which, as we mentioned, has existed for over 50 years. However, a longitudinal comparison of all of the survey data going back from previous studies found that master passage shown in red has remained very static, but a lot of the entrance passages have been very dynamic, are reforming, they're changing, they are subject to the influences of seasonal weather closing them off, and also in warm weather, passage collapse, which can fill in a passage and cause essentially new pathways to have to form to bypass those. And so a profile view cartoon, which shows that sort of passage morphology. Again, we have seen from the previous image, the master passage being typically static, and also some laterally oriented passages closer to the rim, which are associated with fumarolic areas as well. But the other areas close to the entrance and the marginally oriented passages that sort of rise up towards the crater rim tend to be fairly dynamic. The other thing that we were very interested in the West Crater cave in Mount Rainier, which has been shown to be more volcanically active, just in terms of the anecdotal evidence of people smelling sulfur gas or other things like that. It was interesting when in 2015 our exploration of the cave system was halted completely by this room, which we called the Canary Room. For good reason. So what we can't see in the image, but was noted by our personal gas monitors, is everything below the line was a concentration of carbon dioxide, which was above 100 parts per million. In the United States, the OSHA definition of immediate danger to life and health. So essentially, you could walk across the room, with actually very nice air for your head, but everything waist down was actually fairly high concentrations. And so I have a chart later that will show you that kind of shows some of that, but it was in contradiction to some studies related to Mount Erebus that sort of postulated that the heat of the gas coming out of the fumaroles would sort of overcome its negative buoyancy, and we shouldn't see traps of carbon dioxide within glaciovolcanic cave systems. So some of the data and readings were able to see concentrations of carbon dioxide in the East Crater up to 10%, but that was 7 meters above the lowest part of the passage, partly due to that I didn't want to die was really the answer, and had a bit of a close call there. But the other areas that we were able to go back to while protected by self-contained breathing apparatus, we were able to do measurements, and a maximum concentration of 24.8 percent in what was affectionately named the carbon dioxide lake of death, or death lake, or however you'd want to say that. So equipped with the breathing apparatus, we're able to sort of fully map both of the cave systems, including the areas of hazardous atmospheres. And from that, not only to make or recreate a current map, but also to map out any hazards, because, as I mentioned, mountaineers do climb Mount Rainier as a very particular objective. Some of them may enter the cave system, and there really actually isn't a lot of public-facing information that shows the hazard, the subglacial hazards. So the areas in green on the diagram are the areas which were considered to be of immediate danger to life and health, either meeting that threshold through a carbon dioxide concentration or a low concentration of carbon dioxide, but combined with the displacement of oxygen due to the high altitude would cause a concern for health. in the West Crater Cave, we see the highest concentrations, again marked in green, which were correlated to the lowest parts of the cave passage. Even the fumarolic areas were sometimes higher up in the cave system, but the carbon dioxide sort of sticking to the low-lying areas. And then just to sort of model that a little bit more and to explain a little bit about it, there isn't a whole lot of airflow, but there is a little bit of air circulation effect, and given that the areas of fumarolic heat are essentially the gas is rising and sort of hitting the ceiling very, very soon after. The ceiling there in the West Crater Cave is very low, so it causes the cooling of the fumarolic emissions, and sort of that could help to contribute to these traps existing here where they may not exist in other types of caves. And I guess I'll talk as well to the ground. So the subglacial breakdown in Mount St. Helens, it's sort of a conglomeration of boulders and blocks, whereas at Mount Rainier we have sort of a sediment. So at Mount St. Helens, we believe that if there were any accumulations, they sort of filter down through the cracks and voids, whereas at Mount Rainier, they don't have that ability. I'll touch briefly on Mount Meager, because this is our lone Canadian example of a glaciovolcanic cave system. The Mount Meager volcanic complex is part of the Garibaldi volcanic belt, and it was in 2016 that these examples of a glaciovolcanic cave were first seen on the Job Glacier. Closer up view, we'll see some of our members of the team and the size of the cave entrance, one of the main cave entrances that's there. So there's a lot of people much smarter than me doing studies at the Mount Meager volcanic complex, but I'll just make note of this because it's interesting. It was Roberti in his PhD thesis who, I want to say it was 28 unstable slopes, there's just so much hydrothermal alteration in and amongst the area here. And you can see the two green triangles in sort of the middle of there, which are the fumarole locations that he had plotted there. And then Trygve Steinsen, who's on the call, it seems. Thanks for joining us, Trygve. So this is part of his ongoing work to sort of study the Mount Meager caves. And so we can see changes seasonally from what were two entrances in 2018. Now we can see the system developing in multiple entrances. And the reason why we haven't necessarily done the same mapping efforts that we have in the other cave systems is that there is a toxic concentration of hydrogen sulfide gas coming out of the cave system. So Trygve's research has focused on the numerical modeling of glaciovolcanic voids and chimneys, which he can explain much better than I could. So I will defer to him if he wants to add comments at the end. Anyways, that's me in red at the, you can, again, just to give the size of the scale of the cave entrance, we are hoping to go back protected by self-contained breathing apparatus to actually do a physical exploration of the subglacial morphology, measure fumarole temperatures, and collect sediments to help our astrobiology partners who are interested in what might be living in these subglacial areas that have a high sulfur content to the ambient air. So another video just to show the scale. This was from 2021 in the fall, so just a few months ago, and that kind of shows the morphology. And we had about 10 to 20 parts per million hydrogen sulfide just walking around the glacier close to the entrance there. And if I can get the video to move on. All right, a little bit too much. I'm going to back off there. So Linda can now take over. And our next Pacific Northwest example that we can give you is Mount Hood, which is very interesting because it differs a little bit from our other examples.
Yeah, I will talk really briefly about Mount Hood, but we thought that this is really important because Mount Hood is kind of different from the other examples. Because on Mount Hood, we do have hot springs being discharged subglacially. So this is completely different compared to the other volcanoes where we have these specific fumarolic activity causing the glaciovolcanic cave systems to form. And on Mount Hood, yeah, as you can see in this image, the caves on Mount Hood are really, really wet, and you have these hot streams kind of everywhere in the caves. And yeah, almost already 10 years ago, there were first investigations, and yeah, a team mapping more than 2 kilometers of cave passages. For example, we can see here a system called the Snow Dragon Glacier Cave System with 3 different branches: the Frozen Minotaur, the Snow Dragon, and the Pure Imagination part. So yeah, 10 years ago, this was a really, really large system and a very distinctive system. But yeah, this system is retreating. So you can see here one branch called the Pure Imagination Cave. And you can really see that the entrances to this part of the cave are retreating. You can see here the entrance area in 2012, then in June 2015, and in October 2015. And yeah, this is because Sandy Glacier, where these cave systems are located, is melting a lot and retreating. So yeah, I think glacier retreat on Mount Hood is a really big issue, and this is, of course, affecting its glaciovolcanic cave systems. So yeah, Flitch et al. 2017 did a lot of investigations in these former cave systems, and they did a lot of climatologic studies, and they mapped different warm springs, doing anemometry and temperature and humidity measurements. And yeah, I think Mount Hood is a really interesting volcano, and its cave systems are really interesting to investigate, but we have to consider that the caves are disappearing. So yeah, you can, I would also like to show you an example of hot springs, because when I say hot springs, I'm talking about temperatures of about 20 degrees. And for example, here you can see thermal imaging from one of these hot streams, and a boulder which has fallen down to the ground. And you can see here this hot spring water is mixing with colder water. And yeah, I think there's not a lot to say about Mount Hood, because the glacier is disappearing, and also its glaciovolcanic cave systems. So we have unfortunately no ongoing studies on this volcano, and of course it would be interesting to see in how far these caves have changed after 10 years, and if they already exist. So what I did, I visited Mount Hood 3 years ago, and we even found some of these caves still existing. But the question is for how long these caves will exist, and maybe if there's another possibility for cave systems to form on the other side of a volcano. So yeah, I think Mount Hood is a really good volcano to study in the future if the glacier will not completely melt out. And yeah, after seeing different examples of volcanoes and glaciovolcanic cave systems, I think it's time to move on to the question of what are glaciovolcanic caves. And yeah, Christian can tell you a little bit more about this.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, given the examples, we're starting to kind of come up with, again, putting my speleology hat on, talking a bit about more of the morphology types and what we're seeing. So, based on those examples, we can see that the glacial volcanic caves, the genesis is owed to the hydrothermal system, and we've seen that most examples are fumarolic, or at least the ones that we've seen, Mount Hood being that outlier where there's a warm spring. But I could also imagine, although I've never been inside one, is that a subglacial eruption could cause a void space, under the ice as well. So of course, glaciovolcanism means that these things have obviously existed and do exist, but I think that would be an interesting thing to see. So moving on, we have some morphological patterns that we've seen, and I'll show you some examples of those. So first off, we have the thermally influenced glacial conduit. So going back to that definition of glacier cave and glacial conduit. So yes, this is similar in terms of the morphology to an glacial conduit, but the genesis is owed to these warm springs. The example being Mount Hood. We also see examples where a single point source of heat, such as a single fumarole event, causes sort of a dome-shaped structure, which, if close to the surface, can breach sort of a skylight, such as the example in the top right is at Mount Rainier, or in Mount St. Helens, we see that sort of morphology as well. But if we get a number of those close together or multiple point sources of heat, then we see that they will form connections between each other that stay open due to the atmospheric convection. We can see the scalloping on the walls, which is a recognition of that. So Mount Rainier, that entire circumferential passage, which looks more like a linear tube, is actually more of a chain of these sort of dome-shaped structures that have formed in that pattern. Then we see chimneys. So the examples being this one from Mount St. Helens, and other ones that we could see just from the literature is at Mount Erebus, which are famous for the fumarolic ice towers that accompany those rising conduits and chimneys. At St. Helens in 2020, we actually saw there was a depression that had formed over top of one of the very tall chambers in the cave. And in 2020, that actually caused a collapse or a skylight to open. So now we have a pathway for the heat flux to go upwards through the ice instead of along the rock ice margin, which is what we normally see at Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier. And then we see the glacial features which have intersected glaciovolcanic cave morphology. So on the left in Mount St. Helens, we can see an example of a crevasse which has intersected Rodan Cave. And then Crevasse Cave itself in Mount St. Helens is named Crevasse Cave because its main chimney conduit is part of the Bergschrund that has formed at the sort of southern end of the glacier, closer to the crater rim than the rest of the cave entrances. So, and that can be maintained by atmospheric advection. Once a glacial feature has intersected a cave, then it can be maintained for longer periods. And then ice marginal melt at the rock ice interface. We see that in those passages that go up towards the crater rim or towards the lava dome, and in other very smaller void spaces that have occurred. And that's an example from Mount Rainier. Okay, so with that, I think we should thank a lot of our partners, which are listed on the slide, who've supported the studies. The studies at Mount Rainier required over 100 people to sort of be porters, to bring equipment to the summit on the front end and on the back end of each of our expeditions there. We rely a lot on our logistical support, our team's doctor, and all sorts of people who've enabled these studies. And as well our extended network in relation to Mount Rainier and some of the other examples that we've given in the presentation. So really appreciate everyone taking an interest in this topic. I think there's a lot of research potential, especially given the examples that we showed at the beginning and the areas where there are probably similar cave systems that you know, we'd have a lot of interest in. All right, Linda, is there anything else to conclude with?
I think that's all. So yeah, if you have any questions, you are very welcome to ask, and we can talk a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Linda and Christian. That was absolutely incredible. Your fieldwork looks amazing. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to write in the chat or use the raised hand function or unmute yourself and ask away. So we have one question in the chat already, and that is, how do you assess passage stability in the snow and ice?
Christian, I think this is a question for you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely what we've seen just over time and experience in warm weather, we see a higher level of risk, especially around the entrance areas of the caves, which can be prone to collapse. So that has sort of caused us to take pause at certain times. Certain entrances we've decided not to go in because they appear hazardous. And other times, one of the hazards that we see, especially with Mount St. Helens, given there's so much tephra and rockfall and things embedded in the glacier, is that we see actually not just a potential for ice collapse, we also see volcanic boulders and things in the ceiling that can literally melt out as you are moving through a passage and fall down in the cave. So having a situational awareness has actually been really key to, you know, moving through the cave with an awareness of those hazards.
And we have a question from Thorsten Seehaus.
Hear me?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, okay, perfect. I was just wondering, but I missed the first few minutes of the talks. Sorry for that. But how do you find the caves? I was just wondering, are you just going there, or do you use like some GPR data, like ground penetrating radar, on the glacier to discover if there are some caves below the ice?
Yeah, I could answer a little bit. So the most of the Pacific Northwest examples that we've shown you were found by large entrances being seen during aerial surveys and then reported to us because there were sort of folks in the USGS or others who had known our interest. The Mount Rainier system has been known about for over 100 years, so that one was, you know, was more of a common knowledge. So mostly we're relying on people sort of reporting them. We're not necessarily using ground penetrating radar. Mount Meager as well was seen on an aerial survey. So that's what's driven us to focus on those areas specifically.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there might be also some domes below the glacier where you don't have an entrance. So like that. So, but might it be possible to see it in a radar gram?
Yeah, I believe so. And in Mount Meager, and I forget the name of the folks who were working on it, there had been some ground penetrating radar that found void spaces under the ice. But that was also, we also knew that the cave system was there because of the obvious and very large entrance.
Okay, and one more question regarding the glacier growth at Mount St. Helens. Why is the glacier growing there? Because more or less all the other glaciers there are losing ice.
Yeah, I think Mount St. Helens is a very special example. Yeah, so the new glacier was able to form because we have, first of all, we have these surrounding crater walls. So they are kind of providing shade to the glacier and to the ice, and so the snow from different seasons can accumulate. And the second aspect is that we have a lot of rockfall from the crater walls. So I think you can compare it a little bit with rock glaciers, where you have this rock as a kind of isolating, insulating layer protecting the snow from melting.
Okay, thank you.
And John Smiley, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Nice talk, guys. Fantastic photographs. I'm just curious, all your photographs of the caves show the walls to be smooth and that lovely scalloped appearance, whereas my memory of the Erebus caves is that certainly several of them are absolutely covered in very large dinner plate size hopper crystals and long, thin branching stag's horn crystals. Do you get those kind of caves as well, or are they all smooth? And if they're all smooth, why is that?
Christian, I think this is something for you.
Yeah, so I guess the examples that we've had involvement with do not have the same structures that have been seen in Antarctica. So no, we haven't seen any of those. And in terms of the difference, actually, some of the folks in our research partners are interested in this, but we don't necessarily have an answer to it. So it's just not something we've personally looked into in any depth.
Okay, another quick question. The Erebus caves, some of them are really very hot. One was nicknamed the sauna cave for obvious purposes, despite being at 4 kilometers and -30, -35 outside. You could strip off inside and sweat quite comfortably. Do you get temperatures at those kind of levels in your caves?
So do you mean air temperatures inside the caves, or what exactly do you mean?
Beg your pardon, air temperatures, yes. They were steep. The sauna cave in particular was very steamy. In fact, when we put our clothes on and came back outside, everything froze solid.
So I think on Mount St. Helens, maximum cave temperatures were around, I think, 10 degrees. I mean, of course, it depends where you put the data logger, because if you put it near a fumarole, of course, it gets higher. But fumaroles inside the Mount St. Helens caves are not really hot. So I think maximum temperatures were around 60 degrees, but they are very differing from time to time. So the cave system as a whole isn't really hot. And on Mount St. Helens, sometimes you have some steamy parts, but I think compared to the Mount Hood caves, these are pretty steamy and really have a lot of moisture in it. How is it on Mount Rainier, Christian? Do you have any data for temperatures? Cave air temperatures?
Yeah, I mean the ambient air of something like 4 to 7 degrees, but specific fumarole vents could be much higher, and so you could definitely burn yourself on a few of those. But these, average ambient air was around 4 to 7.
Okay, thanks very much.
So on the chat, we have both Jenny Gilbert and Tim Orr saying thank you for an interesting talk, in case you hadn't seen that. And Dave McGarvey asking, outside North America, how common are glaciovolcanic caves? For example, ice-capped volcanoes in South America, or within large ice sheets in Iceland. And Rodrigo Satura is asking the same question as well, and hello from Chile.
Hello.
So,
Yeah, Linda, go ahead.
So I think there's a lot of potential for glaciovolcanic caves to exist on a lot of volcanoes, glaciated volcanoes worldwide. So we have a paper being recently published, which covers these aspects. So of course, everywhere, on every place where we have this interaction of a glacier with a volcano and fumarolic or in general with heat, we expect glaciovolcanic cave systems to exist, but unfortunately we are just aware of a few examples. So I think this is a good possibility for future studies to explore more glaciovolcanic caves.
Tanuka Ilanko says, might the presence of crystals be related to the fact Erebus caves are not technically in glaciers now, but in snow? Caves where those are seen, if I recall correctly, are some of the deeper and well-established cave systems. I'm not sure if John Smiley also has a comment on this.
Sorry, Rosie, I actually wasn't listening there. I was reading some of the chats. What was the question again?
So it's about the Mount Erebus caves, the presence of crystals being related.
Oh yeah,
to,
just got to it. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
supposed to get to that. Yes, yes, you're absolutely correct. The caves are actually in snow accumulations, very thick snow accumulations within the caldera, so they're not technically glaciers. I'm not sure how that would affect it. All I remember, this is some time ago, I was there, they were just so spectacular with these huge crystals, very, very fragile. I was just curious if they occur elsewhere in the world. I don't know why that should make a difference, but yeah, no idea really.
Okay, and then so Rodrigo has a follow-up question about the differences on caves related to their positions within the glaciers, for example, between ablation or accumulation zones. We noticed this in North America.
Linda, do you want to maybe talk about that?
I think I didn't really understand the question.
Sorry. Have you noticed any differences on the caves related to their position within the glaciers, particularly between the ablation or accumulation zones?
Yeah, of course. So on Mount St. Helens, most of the caves are located around the new lava dome, and we have a lot of accumulation there. So due to this, we have growing cave systems because the glacier is growing towards upper parts of the lava dome. So we have a kind of lateral expansion towards the lava domes, and the caves are growing. On Mount Hood, this is a completely different example because we have the glacier and the cave systems being on a slope of a volcano. And so, yeah, as we already mentioned, glacial retreat is a big problem worldwide. So, yeah, on Mount Hood, we see these caves systems being disappearing. And yeah, another example for kind of static system where glacial melt and accumulation is in a more or less steady state, we can see on Mount Rainier, which has a really high altitude. So the cave systems are located inside the craters. So of course, all these cave systems can be completely different. And of course, the location on the volcano is also really important. I hope this answered the question.
I'd just like to point out that Tanuka Ilanko also has drawn our attention to a paper that does discuss possible ice caves elsewhere in the world. So the Curtis and Kyle 2017 in the Journal of Volcanology and Geothermal Research. That would be relevant.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, and so Aaron Curtis was the one pictured with the ice worm in our Mount St. Helens photos. So He's been out in the field with us, and yeah, he did his PhD specific on glaciovolcanic or fumarolic ice caves, as he had termed them.
Great. Does anyone have any more questions? Well, thank you so much, Linda and Christian. That was really, really interesting work and really great photos as well. We haven't really had a talk quite like this yet in our seminar series, so thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you so much.